Drilling for Ashes with Dr. Joanne Ballard. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we are coming to you not live this week from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, where we are nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. We are joined by the Watcher this week. He is here. He is watching. He is going to be helping us out with this show. Thanks for coming on, buddy. Really appreciate it. But we're also joined by a special guest, Dr. Joanne Ballard, who is a geologist. She specializes in analyzing lake sediment cores, paleo wildfires, and she is a member of the Comet Research Group. Dr. Ballard, thank you very much for coming on the show. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So we met you at the Cosmic Summit, and you were on stage answering questions a little bit after... Was it
Mark Young's
presentation? Right. Sorry, I was very distracted during the summit.
He was nervous.
I was nervous, and I had my own presentation to do, so I didn't get to see a lot of things, and I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. But we're glad to have you on the show. And can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved with the Comet Research Group?
Okay. Well, I became interested in earth sciences, and in particular, the woolly mammoth extinction, the megafaunal extinction some 12,800 years ago, and just became very passionate about that. What an interesting problem that is. What caused that? And so in 2007, Rick Firestone and Alan West and many other authors came out with the Younger Dryas extraterrestrial impact hypothesis, that some comet or a bolide of some sort came from outer space and crashed into the earth and caused mayhem. And so I thought this was like really interesting to have a catastrophe connected to that. So I went back to school. I went to the University of Cincinnati and started studying lake sediments, because those give you a window back in time. You take a meter length of mud that is about 2 inches in diameter, and you drill down into the lake mud and take meter after meter into the lake mud. And the deeper you go, the further back in time it is. And you can, and the reason we use lake mud is because if the lake has not dried up, that's considered to be a fairly steady state repository of what was going on around the lake, and can give us a window into climate, environment in the past. So we can look at things called proxies, which are stand-ins for what was happening. You know, we didn't have a paleothermometer, so what can we use to look at past temperatures? You can look at chironomids, ostracods, diatoms, all these little creatures.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, whoa. Right. Okay, they're little creatures. Okay.
They're little creatures that live in the lake, and you know, people studying different species of those today can say, oh, well, this type likes to live in this range of temperatures. This, this species likes to have clear water versus muddy water. And so you look at all these different things. Some people look at pollen, and by looking at pollen, that gives a view into what vegetation was growing in the region. So what I studied was charcoal, to try and understand if there was massive wildfires at the time of this mammoth extinction, megafaunal extinction. Was there a big wildfire, a charcoal spike? So you have to, as a scientist, you have to have a systematic way of analyzing those lake cores. And so that was a new thing to me. And so I started out with one method, and then maybe a year into my studies, I met with Kathy Whitlock, who was like the queen of charcoal studies, so I went to her lab and studied with her for a couple of weeks and learned a new method, which you take a couple of cc's of the lake mud and you go every centimeter and sample 2 cc's. And each of those samples, you're going to put in a cup with bleach and sudsy solution leave it sit for 24 hours. Then you're going to sieve it with a particular size sieve, because you got to standardize what you're doing. So you treat all your samples the same.
Mhm.
And then you're going to count how many bits of charcoal you have and build your charcoal record.
Wow.
And so I cored with my advisor and some volunteers. We cored 4 lakes in Michigan to get the mud for this study, and I analyzed all of those for the charcoal data. And then at the Younger Dryas, yes, there was a spike of charcoal, but there was also some other spikes earlier. So it's like, oh, well, what's that mean? Did you have like multiple extraterrestrial impacts? Or are there other reasons for why you have these other charcoal spikes? And what was the vegetation in the area? You have to look at that too.
Yeah. How much earlier were these other spikes? Can you give us a ballpark?
In the falling Alarod, so maybe between 15,000 and 13,000, there were some charcoal peaks in there. And I have graphs in my online master's thesis that's accessible online, and you can go and look at the graphs that I put together, and you can actually see, what the time frame is for the spikes in the different lakes, the lake data.
So they didn't particularly line up with any other anomalies like the meltwater pulses or anything like that?
No, not really. So the vegetation in that area at the time in Michigan would have been boreal pines and spruce. And those typically, pines have evolved to flourish with fire. It's a natural part of their ecosystem, or what they need to thrive, because you need wildfires to burn away the litter and the trash that builds up under those pine trees. And so if you don't have a fire, the pine seeds cannot take root and the seedlings can't get going. You also have to have heat to open up the pine cones so that the seeds come out.
That's cool.
So, it would be a natural, and we see like wildfires in Canada and in Greece today, that's going to happen. And if you had like smaller fires more frequently, then it would be less of a problem. Like if you go a long time, like the Smokey the Bear program of we need to suppress wildfires. Oh, well, that's great, except the biomass is building up. And then when you do have a fire, it's more catastrophic.
Yeah.
There's a lot more fuel on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where you need some other proxy in addition to the charcoal, because the charcoal, that's good, but charcoal alone isn't enough to say, oh, yes, that was a wildfire caused by an extraterrestrial impact. So that's where it's helpful to have some other indicator, geochemistry. And you probably know about the Petiev paper, 2013. Petiev et al. Wrote about an analysis of the Greenland ice cores where they found platinum at 12,800 years ago.
Yeah.
And he said that's a global signal, and they don't think I don't think he didn't think it was volcanism, because platinum can be in volcanoes. So that seems to be pretty good evidence for extraterrestrial impact. And then Christopher Moore has also found platinum in some terrestrial sediments he studied that date to the onset of the Younger Dryas.
How deep do you normally have to go in these lakes to get to this boundary? Like how far down in the mud is it usually, or is it different for every lake?
It's going to be different for every lake, but it's surprisingly not very thick for like when you're trying to figure out how much sediment, how much time does that represent?
Yeah.
To begin with, you may get like a lower radiocarbon date and a higher radiocarbon date, and then you take your depths and you kind of average and interpolate what is the accumulation rate, and it's usually like less than a millimeter a year.
Oh, okay. So
actually, it would probably be good for me to pull up my thesis to look at that, because I can tell the depths, that we went.
Yeah.
A millimeter
Seemed
a
like
year.
it was, you have to get through all the water first.
Right.
So you've got to go down and then reach the sediment water interface, and then you start drilling down, and you're going to have a lot of Holocene squishy mud, and then you go down deeper and you get into, mid Holocene, early Holocene, and then into the Lateglacial stuff. So I think we pushed through the squishy mud stuff because we weren't really interested in the Holocene. We wanted to get back to the Younger Dryas to answer that research question.
Okay, I think the Watchers got what is this? Link to the paper written while at the University of Cincinnati about the lakes of East Michigan. So we can put that in the show notes. He's got the link up there. So, so did you look for more proxies? Or did you just have to coordinate with other people?
Well, that's a good question. So at the University of Cincinnati, with that being a master's degree, that was just 2 years. And so the focus was on getting some radiocarbon dates and doing the charcoal data, and that was it. But I was also looking underneath the microscope and learning and making observations about what other things, are there, like Daphnia, the water flea. There was all these strange biological organisms, and it was the egg cases of the Daphnia, the water flea. So that's where I reached out to some other experts, pollen experts, biologists, and would ask them sometimes, like Eric Grimm helped me with that. I said, do you know what this is? And there's also places like University of Minnesota has this image sieve for different things they find in lake cores. And that is a useful resource sometimes if you're trying to identify something and look. So after Cincinnati, then later I went to the University of Tennessee. I had another opportunity to work on lake sediments with Dr. Sally Horn. And so Dr. Horn, Tom Lowell was my advisor at Cincinnati, Dr. Tom Lowell, and he's a glaciologist. So that was a very interesting experience to have a sedimentologist, glaciologist as an advisor. We even took a field trip to Iceland to learn about glaciers. So that was really cool. But the benefit of being at University of Tennessee with Dr. Horn is now she's a pollen expert and a macrofossil expert. So now I can add this to my repertoire. And some of the lake cores that she had already in storage, she had the pollen data already done by Hazel Delcourt, Dr. Hazel Delcourt, her predecessor. So I could build on that pollen data and get the charcoal data and get geochemical data. And then there was this other unexpected thing that I found as I was studying these cores, and that was some of them, like Cahaba Pond. That was a site studied by Hazel Delcourt and her husband, Paul Delcourt, a geologist, and that is in Alabama. And so those cores were in Sally's lab, and they had dried out, because they had had them a long time, so they dried out. So we wanted to get the charcoal data out of it. And that core was interesting in that the bottom of it, the older part, was kind of this tan look to me. Just visually, it looked more mineral rich. And then as you came into the Holocene, it became organic. So that could be consistent with shallowing of the pond, but also, why do you have all this? Or what caused that change? Was it simply a shallowing, or was there some event or something went on? So the cores were dried out. So I had to take a hacksaw and cut them at 1 centimeter interval. It's like, oh
no,
cut these cookies. So Sally's like, you cut those cookies, cut them into cookies, take half of the cookie, save it for archive, take the other half and dissolve that and get charcoal out. So while I'm doing this, I'm seeing these crystals. It's like, what are these crystals? And Firestone and his co-authors were saying there was nanodiamonds and carbon spherules, and I thought, oh, these crystals, could they be nanodiamonds? So this was very interesting. I said to Sally, what's a likelihood of us finding another proxy in lake mud, such as from ash? If you had this catastrophic fire, maybe there would be a lot of ash. And could we find an ash signal? And she didn't really think so. And I thought, well, ash would tend to dissolve, wouldn't it? And so in a river, it would probably dissolve and then just get washed out to sea. And so I wasn't sure it would really be a good idea or anything. And also in studying wildfires, you look at catastrophic fires as a comparison. Do we have any analogies in historic time for a catastrophic fire that we could kind of study for? Is there something we can compare to? And so the Great Chicago Fire and this is where the watcher can look this up. The Peshtigo Fire of, I think it's 1871. Peshtigo, Wisconsin, was pretty much wiped out by this catastrophic fire. The same day was the Great Chicago Fire and these fires in Michigan. And this is like so unbelievable. And there was an eyewitness to the fire in Peshtigo, and that was Father Pernin. And so he's describing this, and the setting was such that they were doing a lot of logging, and all of this logging debris was laying about. And there was also like smoldering fires in a swamp off to one side of Peshtigo. And at some point, they said there was an explosion in the swamp, and the fire behavior was very strange. Like the fire was like a fireball hopping across the treetops.
Yeah.
And in the end, there was this thick layer, like, I don't know if it was a foot thick, 8 inches thick, but everything was burned, and there was just very strange phenomena that occurred. And Father Pernin ended up in the river, but that fire jumped across the river to the other bank, and they all got, those people who survived got hypothermia because they had to huddle in that river overnight. And then, once the things had settled down, well, then how are you going to communicate the catastrophe that's just happened to get help, to get water, to get dry clothes, that kind of thing. So anyway, I'm thinking about this thick layer of, you might have a thick layer of ash if you had something happen at the onset of the Younger Dryas that was catastrophic. So that's why I was thinking about the ash as an indicator. So then back to the crystals I'm seeing. One person that was on my committee at the University of Tennessee was Dr. Stephen Dreese, who's a soil scientist. And typically for soil scientists, they would take the soil profile and they might put epoxy with it and then make a paper thin slice of that and put that underneath the microscope and look at the structures in it. So, okay, that's a standard practice with soil. Can we apply that to lake sediments? Because we want to look at these crystals. Plus, this is a little easier because it's already dried mud. So he's like, okay, yeah, we can do that. So he takes a look at those crystals that are in that Cahaba Pond lake core. He comes back and he says, well, I can tell you what they are, but I don't really know how they formed or anything. But he said there's silicious aggregates. So there's silt grains, which is dust size. There's quartz silt grains, and they're cemented together with this silica, amorphous silica. And in some cases, there was bits of organic material, like maybe part of a seed or something was in there. So now it falls to me as the student to figure out how did this form? How did this form? So they're not nanodiamonds. Okay, too bad. But it's like, all right. But,
yeah, I don't. You can't see nanodiamonds with the naked eye, can you?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But, that was the first thing I was.
Yeah. You're like, nanodiamonds. Yeah.
Right, and these are quite tiny. I mean, but you could see.
Yeah, it was sparkling.
Sparkling in the sediment. It's like, well, yes, but they would have been larger than nanodiamonds. So then I had to do a review of the literature, and what are these things? We'll call them silicious aggregates because they are aggregates bound together with amorphous silica. So it turns out that they were reported in the literature in Hayanim and Kabara caves in Israel. And these were sites that had human occupation in the caves. And so the people were burning things in the cave, and then water percolated through. And so I think it was Schiegel and some others. The watcher can look this up maybe. So Schiegel and others and Wiener had studied this and reported them as being a byproduct of fire. So they formed from fire. Okay, so this is very interesting. They formed from ash. So
Okay.
that's in a cave with no human occupation, and we have an open site. And where we found these was roughly around late glacial time, so maybe onset younger dryas. The problem with some of the lakes in the southeast is they sometimes have hiatuses in them, and they sometimes will dry out. They're typically sinkhole ponds. So, and some of those ponds will plug up, and then maybe they'll open up and that kind of thing. So the hiatuses is a bit of a problem, and the drying out can be a problem because you can get worm burrows, you can get root infiltration. That's going to disturb those pristine layers that you want as a scientist who's looking at lake sediments. So
so let me make sure I have this straight. In Israel or somebody they found this kind of material, and they associated it with human occupation fires that water had slowly trickled through, and then it forms these aggregates. That's what you're saying.
Is it like the concrete, almost like using the ash? It sort of crystallizes. Use it like with the ash.
That's but they're tiny. The silicious aggregates are very tiny. They're like these little tiny crystal aggregates.
Okay.
So,
but you're finding them in this open lake in Alabama.
Right.
Wow.
So and during late glacial time, possibly onset younger dryas.
Okay.
Okay. So now we need to look at the other lakes that I have the cores for, which is I had the 4 cores from Michigan. So we took 2 of those, actually 2 of the sites I had cores from. So 2 of the Michigan lakes, we looked at those for silicious aggregates. We looked at Anderson Pond, Central Tennessee for silicious aggregates. We looked at Cahaba Pond, Alabama, and we looked at Pigeon Marsh, Georgia. The Pigeon Marsh site, though, had been disturbed by humans, and so it was missing the younger dryas section. Okay, so we had the clues from doing the literature review. So now it's like, okay, but we don't really know how long it takes them to form or other things. So I set up an experiment, and I burned some wood, and I got ash. And then I had these little containers that I set up in a tray, and I had them in a fume hood, and I would water them every day. And then after 2 months, I dried them out, put epoxy on them, sent them to the thin section company, and they made some thin sections. And Steve Dreesy took a look and found the silicious aggregates. So it turns out that wood ash is mostly calcium carbonate, so almost like limestone. So once the trees burn, trees are storehouses of calcium, and who knew?
Wow,
so
that's cool.
Right. So calcium carbonate, wood ash is mostly calcium carbonate with some other minerals, and it also contains small silica phytoliths. So these are little structures that help support the tree.
Yeah. And
so when the tree burns, those silica phytoliths are there in the wood ash. Well, now, if you put water on that wood ash, if anybody's made soap, they know that lye is extremely alkaline, maybe a pH of 13. So now you've got an extremely alkaline slurry, and so what happens to those phytoliths is they turn to a gel. And that's where this amorphous silica is coming from. And that percolates down through the ash. And if there's any dust in the atmosphere, it's going to stick to those. It's going to adhere to those. And then maybe as the ash dries out, that hardens up, and now you have a silicious aggregate. Wow. So and this happened in less than 2 months. So maybe it happens in less time than that, but I didn't want to do too short of an experiment and then dry it out, send it off to the thin section company, and we don't have any results.
Right.
So I made it longer just to err on the side of safety,
Yeah.
So this is crazy.
By the way, Watcher pulled up. He says Steve Weiner, Paul Goldberg, and how do you say this one? Offer Bar Yosef. Is that right? These names sound familiar to you?
Steve Weiner for sure.
Yeah.
Goldberg, and then there was Schiegel was another paper.
Oh, okay.
And I think Wiener has written a book on this, where he talked about the siliceous aggregates, but there's several papers and they focus on these two caves.
Okay.
So they were very helpful to my research because they kind of gave me some leads on what to look at. So now we have this situation where we formed them. And so you had a wildfire. Was it catastrophic? We're not sure, but Steve Dreese examined thin sections in Anderson Pond from, maybe as 18,000 years ago, all through the Holocene, and only found them around the late glacial time. So the problem is, it's sometimes hard to get really precise dates, particularly around the Younger Dryas, the beginning of the Younger Dryas. So it's suggestive of maybe a catastrophic event across eastern North America, because you have the Michigan lakes, you have Tennessee, you have Alabama, and so they're all suggesting that there's silicious aggregates during the late glacial, possibly the onset of the Younger Dryas. So if you did have a catastrophic fire across all of eastern North America, then did the silicious aggregates form on the land and then get washed into the lake, or did the ash fall into the lake,
into the water? Yeah.
And then they formed in place in the lake. So I would have to do another experiment to figure that one out, but maybe. And so going forward, the thing to do would be find other lakes and look for those silicious aggregates. And if this is a catastrophic fire signal, then it would support that. And White Pond might be a good candidate in South Carolina.
Did you have a question?
I was just thinking about do you have an idea or a possible way to determine the difference that if the silicious aggregates were formed and already in the soil and washed into the lake versus the ash falling in the lake and then them forming in the bottom of the lake? How would you
test for that?
Yeah.
I have thought about that, and I thought you could probably even just take a 1 liter water bottle and fill it with ash, and then just put water in it and leave it sit for maybe a week, and then dry it out, and then do your thin section analysis. And that would be equivalent to the ash is falling into, maybe fill it half full with ash and then fill it all the way up with water, leave it sit for a week or 2 weeks or what have you, and then see if they have formed in that.
And it would seem like if it was washing in with other soils, like you could even, I guess you could kind of set that up and see, does it look different? Because it would be, when you're doing these samples, are you looking at it exactly as it was in the lake sediment in a thin section, or is it also being sieved in your?
No, it would be exactly as you see it in the lake sediments, because, and so one reason this might not be a real popular methodology for scientists to take on is because when you take those lake sediment cores, it's a 2-inch diameter, and you're taking a meter of material, and you may do an offset core like maybe a meter away. And so that's not a whole lot of material if you're taking like a CC for, charcoal analysis, and you're doing some pollen analysis and other things. This takes like quite a bit of your lake sediment mud to do a thin section, to look at the structures in there. So that's kind of the drawback to doing this, but you could plan for it and maybe get it done. So, if it was a widespread practice, this would be another way to test for a catastrophic signal.
Yeah.
Look for that, and then if it's there, and so you have to have like a continuous record, and those sites in the southeast have those hiatuses. Some of them have hiatuses in them. That's a problem. Ideally, you would have a lake with varves, but those are few and far between. And varves are where you have a summer-winter pair, couplet. And so you can just count those, and that helps you corroborate your radiocarbon date. Let's say you find a leaf or a twig, you can radiocarbon date that. But the bars would help you also, as a cross check for your radiocarbon date.
And in the South, you have a problem because it's just summer all the time.
And it cools off a little bit in the winter, but not that much.
Yeah, and it's just a cool summer, and then go back to summer.
Yeah. So what about Kettle lakes? Because they would have only been lakes after the meltdown, right? They would have just formed in the.
So Kettle lakes are different, and you find those in Minnesota and Michigan. In fact, Slack Lake and Swift Lake, 2 of the 4 lakes that we cored in Michigan, those are Kettle lakes. And so they think that those formed from big chunks of ice that fell off the Laurentide ice sheet and flopped down and then got covered with mud, and very slowly the ice melted, and now you've got this depression that fills with water, and that's your Kettle Lake.
So it would seem like the varves or the sediments in that lake would only go back. Like once you get to the bottom of these lake sediments, it should be right at that boundary. Is that right?
Right. And it's usually messy at the bottom. You usually hit sand. When you're coring in those lakes, you're going to hit sand and maybe gravel and that kind of thing, especially where it's periglacial. You're going to have different sizes of rocks, sand and gravel, which is hard to, you're not really going to go any deeper.
Yeah, because the ice is dropping stuff.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And then, if that ice boulder or whatever it was that made the Kettle Lake sits there for hundreds of years melting slowly,
yeah, that's true.
It's going to be way past the event that you're looking for, maybe. That's it. So
right,
you have to find. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so if you look at a reconstruction map of how far down the glaciers from the Laurentide ice sheet flowed and when they receded, and people have studied this, you could say, well, Flint, Michigan, where these cores were taken, where these lakes were in Michigan, you could say, well, maybe it would have been around 16,000 that the ice had withdrawn, maybe 15,000. And so when we got radiocarbon dates, I think we had a date that was maybe 16,000 years old, which
okay. So this Kettle Lake then was formed just from the recession of the glacier.
Okay,
it's like a chunk of glacier. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Right. So the drop stones that you're thinking of, those might be in like glacial Lake Agassiz, which would have an ice layer on it during the winter, and maybe it would be open in the summer. That's where you're going to get, if it was to be varved, that's how you would get your summer winter layers. But also you could get drop stones and other things that have drifted out there on maybe an iceberg on that huge peripheral lake.
Yeah.
But there was some gravel sized chunks in the Michigan lake cores, but of course you're using that 2-inch diameter. So if you were to hit a boulder, you're not going to bring that up.
Yeah.
It's going to hit that, and that'll be the end of it. So we did core through like some fish. There was like an entire fish skeleton down there in one of those lakes. And, as you're starting to like analyze and take sediments, here's a fish rib and, other things associated with a fish. So that was an interesting feature of that lake.
How did that fish get there?
Right. And why didn't it get eaten by other things and get dispersed? Did it get buried quickly, or how would it still be down there?
Yeah,
that is interesting.
That is weird. That is interesting.
And how did fish occur in those lakes? That there was an ice sheet there, and then how did the fish come to be there in these lakes?
That is weird.
That's what I was asking. Like, wait, how did the fish get there in the first place?
Some kind of Fortean explanation for that one, I'm sure.
It rained out of the sky. It did.
Rained out of the sky with a water spout. No, probably the fish eggs traveled on the bird's feet from lake to lake. And eventually, maybe it happened over decades or something, but that's probably how they got there.
Okay, that's a pretty good theory.
It is.
The fish eggs got stuck between the bird's toes.
Yeah.
Huh. I never thought about that.
All right,
I mean, birds eat fish whole. So it's possible that a bird ate a fish, an entire mama fish, and was flying over this Kettle Lake and regurgitated it.
yep.
Well, I
about
think some digestion would occur in between before it came out the other end. And
You don't think the eggs on their feet would dry out over that period of time while they're flying?
I don't know. Maybe if the lakes are close enough together.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so then they make their
Come
way.
on,
And
they
the way-
rained out of the sky. This is the
He
best.
wants them to rain
Right.
out of the sky.
All right. We'll chalk that up as hypothesis number 2.
Okay.
It's always good to have multiple working hypotheses.
It is.
If you don't understand something.
All right, it's break time.
All right, we'll take a break. This is great. We'll
Yes.
be right back.
Yeah.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, joined by Dr. Joanne Ballard, and talking about ancient fires in lake core sediments. So I wanted to ask you about the hypothesis about the Peshtigo fire maybe providing some of these sediments or in local lakes in the area. Have you had a chance to go and look into that and compare it to your findings?
Right. No, I haven't. But that would be something I would like to do. And I did research that and found that there is a lake in that area that someone, I think, has already cored, and they have that in a repository at the University of Michigan. And so if we could make thin sections of the late glacial age sediments and on up, I mean, you might want to look across the whole swath of LGM if it's there but you're also actually, for Beaver Lake, what you're interested in is the historic. So you would use lead-210 dating. You'd use a different way to date that, because radiocarbon dating, you can only do that. You're going to use that for back to 50,000 years ago. So, but for something historic, you would use lead-210. And also those historic sediments are going to be squishy. So if you were to go collect them yourself, you might have to use a freeze core to get them. But anyway.
Oh, can you describe that? Like, I'm imagining they pull it out in a tube and then put it in the freezer. Then you have to cut it.
I think I saw it done once, and I think they use liquid nitrogen.
And freeze it while they're doing it.
Oh,
in a container and drop that down into the mud, and then the mud froze on it, and then you pick it up, and then you have to like wrap it in aluminum foil. And so then you would wrap it and preserve it and put it in the cooler, or wrap it in dry ice or something, get it back to the lab, and then you're going to do your analysis because you want to keep the sediments intact.
wow.
So you want to go back to 1871 and look and see if there's silicious aggregates in that lake. Because probably in the terrestrial environment of Peshtigo, if you went up around Peshtigo, all of that has now been disturbed. You probably couldn't even tell that there's been a raging fire there in the past that was catastrophic. So the trees have probably soaked up a lot of the evidence, the calcium carbonate, and that's all been recycled.
And the winds would have blown it all around in different places. So
right, that too.
So how much? So I know this is a little off the subject of the science itself, but with the Comet Research Group, they're a bunch of independent scientists doing this work, and they're I know they take donations. We donate to the Comet Research Group a little bit.
Yep.
So how much would this cost to do, or maybe if you don't know a figure, like how much resources would it take to go get these sediments, and does it take time? Would it be fairly easy to do? You have to contact Sorry, go ahead.
Right. It would take time, maybe a day, and you could, maybe I might hire somebody to do it. Like at the University of Minnesota, I actually went there and took a lake coring workshop with the person who ran that lake core laboratory, which is like 5 stories underground. And so that's another thing that the watcher can look up, that lake core lab in the University of Minnesota, because it's pretty cool. It's a repository for all these different cores. Some of them are ocean cores, some of them are lake cores. And so that's where they had the tools to do this freeze coring. And we had asked, can you show us how to do that? And so Amy Mirbo, she was the one that was leading the workshop. So she did a demonstration out in the lake on how to do that. So I would coordinate with them to get that done. And I would guess, maybe, I don't know, maybe a couple $1,000 you could get it done. You'd have to go there physically or coordinate with them. And then I think you have to pay to access their cores, because, they're someone has to take care of all
it's like
that.
A library. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, that's cool.
Fee for that. So off the top of my head, I'm not really sure, but it would be very interesting to.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what a lead 210 date would cost to try and pinpoint that. There may be other markers, because in the lake that we were working in, she had told that they had put some chemical or something in the water at a certain year, and it showed up as like this blue substance. And so when you took a core, you could see that. So I don't know if there's anything like that in one of the lakes close to Peshtigo, but I did pinpoint a lake that might be a good candidate, and I could get with them and investigate further. So yeah, that would be a possibility.
So would they have the incentive to do this? I mean, if they're not, because I know that the Comet Research Group, or at least the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, is not exactly standard model.
Right. So they wouldn't have they're just a repository and facilitators. And so you would have to go to them and fund them, like, hey, I want you to do this. If I want them to do the sampling for me, then I'm going to pay to have it done.
Got it. Yeah.
So they could potentially do the work for me, because if they already have the cores from that lake, or they may have to go back and get more. And so I would have to look into that a little bit and get back with you because it's been a while. I looked into that like a while back, and, then I've gone off on other tangents.
Yeah.
So.
I'm just curious, how the process works, to get that done. But that's really cool. So back to the charcoal, I was just, these abundances that you're finding, or this spike in the charcoal at the onset of the Younger Dryas. I remember reading about the biomass burning, where they were talking about possibly like 10% of the biomass burned at that time.
A literal decimation.
Yeah. So does the spike that you found, you think that this is not necessarily evidence of an impact, but this is sort of supporting evidence for that biomass burning? Or was your charcoal what gave them the idea that this is how much burned? I mean, how did they come up with that number?
I'm not really sure. So I just quantified the charcoal, and you're kind of pulling different things together. So
I'm sorry.
So I will say it's kind of hard to infer that from the charcoal spikes. I mean, I guess because I'm conservative in the charcoal data that I have, but I can also imagine that if you do have an impact, a cometary impact, or some kind of bolide like you had at the KT boundary, or, if this happened at 12,800 into the ice sheet, you've got a really weird situation, because it's not necessarily hitting directly into the ground, it's hitting an ice sheet. And now you've got meltwater involved, and mass redistribution that's going to be really crazy. and then you're going to have a lot of soot in the atmosphere that is going to shut out the sunlight. And so you're burning off the vegetation. I can imagine burning off the vegetation from this extraterrestrial impact and the wildfires. And then things are going to get stagnant because you've got this overcast sky. And then as things try and regrow, I mean, if you look, for instance, out west, if they have like some extreme fires in Yellowstone, and then 18 years later, you couldn't even tell there was a wildfire there. Mm-hmm. So I was visiting Yellowstone, and so I saw that, where they told that 18 years earlier, it looked, like a moonscape, and here it bounces back. So in the event of you have something that's more global than that, and you've got the soot in the atmosphere for, let's say, a couple of years, and things try to sprout, but they can't really flourish because there's not enough sunlight. So now you've killed the seeds. It's going to take quite a long time, in my view, for the vegetation to come back. And it may have to come from like way far away, and you've got this barren, stagnant landscape that's all soggy and burned, and so I think that's where and also the meltwater pulses, you're going to have like an ice lid over the North Atlantic, and not that much. So that's going to increase windiness. That's an Occam Brower paper where he thinks there was increased windiness due to that kind of phenomenon. And younger dryas is as people have studied it, it's a return to glacial conditions with increased windiness and increased aridity, and it was colder. And in Europe, it was more, there were fewer trees and more of a meadow type situation.
Yeah, that's what George has told us multiple times, that the boundary material is at the bottom of the black mat layer.
That's right.
And the black mat layer is actually like from this cold wasteland, dank, wet, mold, whatever, fungus, algae, yeah. But not much vegetation was able to grow for a long time. Man.
So would you? Right. I'm thinking again about the lake cores though. If you start out with the burning, and then so you have layers below that would sort of be the end of the Pleistocene and whatever was going on there. Then you have this massive burning event, and you have all this charcoal, and then above that you would have the wasteland conditions. So it seems like the sediment layers above that would be more like devoid of, say, like leaves and all of these bits of organic material, maybe more dust and sand and
right. Whatever. So you might get more dust and sand, and in one of my cores for sure, there's kind of an erosional pulse. So it's more sediment than organic, and also if you've denuded the landscape, then it's going to be more unstable. If it's windier, you're going to get more dust blowing around. And there would be more dust during glacial conditions too, because it was colder. Mm-hmm. So those are good questions. And so one of the things that to consider when you're looking at extraterrestrial impact is the shock wave to the atmosphere will result in breaking up of some of the nitrogen bonds, and you get nitrates that form, and then that rains out as nitric acid rain. And so in some of the lake cores in Europe, they talk about explosions of diatom growths or algal growths. And so this can happen if you have a nutrient pulse. And we see it today where there's agricultural runoff, that's nutrient input, and then you get algal overgrowths. So that was one of the things.
Nitrogen fertilization.
Oh, wow. That is so cool. So the shock wave does this? That is crazy.
The shock wave does this. And so in the Greenland ice cores, if you look at the proxies in there for ammonia and nitrate, there's a spike in those. And so is that from wildfires? That can be a signature of wildfires, but can also be a signature of acid rain. So you would have to do some kind of analysis, I think, for the isotope 17 oxygen, which is very rare, but apparently some people can do that. Meredith Hastings, I think, is an expert on those kind of isotopes. And so I wanted to partner with her, and can she like look for the 17 oxygen and determine if this is a wildfire signal or if it is nitric acid rain, because they would be different. And it turns out everybody wants a piece of that Younger Dryas ice core, and there's not enough of it.
Not enough of it.
And it takes a lot. If you're looking for that 17 oxygen, you have to have quite a bulk of the ice to do it. So it's like that was kind of a dead end.
No, because it's rare, so you need a big chunk to find a sample. Okay.
Right.
Let's go drill.
We'll go find you a piece.
Drill, baby, drill.
Okay. So and that was another factor in when I was thinking about these silicious aggregates. If they're unique to the late glacial or onset Younger Dryas, why don't they form at other times as it appears? And this is a preliminary study, so we would need to do more analyses to find out if this is for sure a thing, that it's definitely late glacial, or if they do occur at other times. Because if they formed in the caves in the presence of ash and water, you would expect to see them, like if there's wildfires. That's why I was wanting to go to Peshtigo and look for that, to try and understand that better. But I thought maybe was it because of the nitric acid rain? Maybe that's a factor. But in the end, when I did the experiment, I had some that I watered with nitric acid rain to simulate that. And the best ones were in the plain water without the nitric acid rain. So it's like, well, I'm sure that would be neutralized by the extremely alkaline ash. So I don't know that that's really a factor. Couldn't really establish that. So anyway, but that's
really cool.
the thing.
Yeah.
I love these experiment stories.
Right?
I'm a big
that's
fan.
how you find out. Conduct an experiment. So then there's also the black mats. So the black mats you're talking about, most of them have been found in the Southwest.
Yes.
Because that's like a desert environment. But there are also black mats in the Netherlands and Belgium and Europe. And they're called the Oslo horizons, named for the town where they were first described by Bas van Heel. That's Vangeel. He's a biologist in Amsterdam. And so he described them because they occur in the cover sands over there, and they are charcoal rich. There's maybe wood in there. There's also fused quartz, melt glass, and sponge spicules. So
what was the last one? Sponge what?
Sponge spicules. So these are like little structures inside of a sponge that are made of silica. And they're kind of they come in all different shapes and sizes. That's like a whole side study to get into sponges and studying the remains of those and identifying them as to species. But anyway, there were definitely silica sponge spicules in that black mat in the Netherlands. So I had samples from a Dutch scientist from one of the Oslo horizons. And so in 2011, I went back there and went to 3 more sites and coordinated with Bas in order to get samples at some of these sites, Luterzand, and 2 other sites. The one was at Lommel, Belgium. One was near Amsterdam. And so I took samples from there and then studied them under the microscope. And you can see the pictures of what I found in a PowerPoint that is on my ResearchGate site. If you're interested in seeing what was discovered there, there was even wood that had silica melt on it, and the wood looked fresh, like something had happened, and now the silica melt was on it. So to me, this says that's a thermal pulse. And the Oslo black mats typically date to, the Balling-Alerod Younger Dryas transition, which is onset Younger Dryas, around 12,800 years ago.
Oh, man.
So that's pretty exciting. They also, in Germany, they're called Finno soils. And so the Dutch typically refer to these as soils. And it's like, those are not soils. That's an event horizon. There's a ton of charcoal in there and soot. There's a lot of soot in there. So Bass wrote a paper that was saying, well, you wouldn't have to have an extraterrestrial impact to get that layer. So he's being very conservative.
Yeah.
Scientist, he's being super conservative. He says all you would need is for the forest to be tinder dry, and then you could burn the whole thing down. So that's his conservative side coming out. He was very interested in studying the black mat that was reported in Saskatchewan on the Discord app. And so the citizen on the ground who was taking the pictures and making the videos, that was all very interesting. But then we heard from Jim Teller, who's a Canadian scientist, and we didn't have a radiocarbon date yet. So it's like, well, it looks pretty interesting. It looks like maybe it's a debris flow with all this charcoal and bones and wood. And so Jim Teller says you need to be careful because that's at a quarry site. And he says he's seen a lot of these sites, and the quarry owners will bulldoze off the organic topsoil, and then they'll bulldoze other stuff on the top of that. And he said what the overburden looks like it's till. It looks like it might be till, but he says more than likely it's been bulldozed. And so, okay, this is really like sad.
Yeah.
You're all excited this might be a good site. Now it's like, oh my gosh. But we still don't know for sure. We would need to, and so should we pay for a radiocarbon date? The radiocarbon date would cost $500. Okay, we have this new intel that says it might be man-made. So therefore, should we spend the $500? I would say not. I would say you need to maybe dig in that black layer and see if there's any man-made trash.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Lithics. Yeah. Just find some lithics that are known.
Or if it's modern, you find a can lid or something.
Oh,
right,
yeah.
or barbed wire.
Yeah, barbed wire, a nail.
Teller was saying barbed wire. If you dig in it, you might find barbed wire or something modern. The other thing would be to contact the quarry owners and ask them if, do you have this practice of doing this? Because they were coming in from the side doing the quarrying, so why would they mess with the top? Well, maybe they would do that if there was trees up there that could fall on their head. I don't know.
Yeah, site prep. Yeah. Yep, for sure. You might flatten it out.
Yeah, so it was a little disappointing that it looked very exciting. And these black mats, these so-called black mats, were across a 8-kilometer range. And he had pictures from 11 different sites. And it sounded very promising. So as a scientist, you have to be super careful. And that's where you have to entertain those multiple working hypotheses. And okay, I would like for this to be, shut this off.
We didn't hear it.
Yeah, it's fine.
That's if there's an 8 different. How many different sites did he find this? Over 8.
11, I think 11, but over 8 kilometers.
And they look similar to each other. I doubt that doesn't some seem kind like of dozer overburden.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
They're all quarry sites. These are the Lake Lenoir Hills. And I think they're quarrying for sand and gravel. So would they have conducted the same practices at all these sites to get the sand and gravel? I don't know.
That's possible. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, but I mean, I would think that what you would do is you would go in and you take the dozer and you clear all the topsoil off because you don't want topsoil in your sand and gravel. You get all the topsoil out of the way, pile it up, and it'd be some big berm somewhere. First, they'd clear if there were trees and stuff on top, they'd clear the trees out of the way and all the grass. Then they'd push the topsoil off of the material that they wanted, and then they'd start excavating that material. It just seems weird that that they would leave
a consistent
black layer in, and bulldoze this other layer over the top.
Yeah, now, why would you spend all this time burying some other layer when you're going to be digging into that site? That doesn't seem right. We need to contact those quarry guys. I'm trying to solve these problems.
I've tried. I didn't have much luck. I've talked to two different people, and I emailed another one. I still haven't found out yet because it's we don't. Yes, it sounds like, oh, this is a no-go, but on the other hand, it could be the real deal hiding, in plain view, and you would like to confirm that one way or another.
Mm-hmm. But is it in a place that could get a black mat? That's okay. It is. Okay.
So the original founder of this, JB's Anyways, on the Discord site, he had a paper that showed that this area was not glaciated at the time of the Younger Dryas, the onset of the Younger Dryas. Yes, it could have been, exposed and burned and that kind of thing.
Okay. Interesting. Yep.
That is cool.
Yes. So it's just one of those things,
That was one of my favorite questions at the Cosmic Summit. The guy was like, "How deep do I have to dig in my backyard to get to the black mat?" Do you remember that question?
No, I don't. But soil takes maybe hundreds of years to form because it's all this dust and organic material, and so if you take off the topsoil, it's really a disadvantage if you're trying to landscape or doing anything, have a garden or anything, because it would take too long. You'd have to haul in topsoil to replace it.
Right. He wanted to find the black mat.
He wants to dig down to the black mat in his backyard. How far down?
Right. Well,
yeah.
The problem with that is, like, say in Indiana, where I am, a lot of time is missing in the geologic record. So, and say in Cincinnati, just across the border there in Ohio, they have Devonian and Ordovician rocks, and they're missing the Pleistocene.
Yeah.
There are some lakes there, I think, some ponds and stuff. So it's kind of patchy, but in a lot of places, the Pleistocene is missing.
Yep.
And is that because it got swept away by overland flow from the melting Laurentide ice sheet, or is it from wind, or
they didn't have a Pleistocene there? That's clearly what happened.
Time just stopped at the Ordovician.
It's a time warp. Yeah.
Yep. I don't think she likes my scientific
you
ideas.
Don't, yeah. You may never find the black mat by digging in your backyard.
That's right.
That's the key.
Right.
Here.
And
you may not have
actually, we don't typically see it, probably because of disturbances, modern disturbances, and maybe it was eroded to begin with. But there is a place in Ohio that Ken Tankersley has studied, and that is at Sheridan Cave. And I went there with him and Alan West, and we took samples. And so I think Ken Tankersley has written that up, and that is a Younger Dryas black mat with a lot of Pleistocene bones of all different kinds of animals that were, when you have a disturbance of that sort, any of the survivors are, they're going to look for refugia, and they're going to be moving around and, not in their typical range.
Yeah. We have a place like that very near here as well. We're on a plateau. It's an erosional environment, and it's all, it's like late Cretaceous bedrock, shallow marine. We have marine fossils everywhere, so it's all very old. But there's a cave very near to us here, and we've tried to go visit it a couple of times. We haven't been successful, but it also has a very thin black mat layer in it and a bunch of Pleistocene bones and volcanic ash, So it's been studied as well for that time period. But yeah, it's rare. Like it just happens to have this deposit in it. So
yeah, we got to go see that place.
Yeah.
So what state are you in? Are you in Texas?
Yeah, we're in the hill country in Texas. So up on the Edwards Plateau. It's like the San Antonio, Austin area. It's all very hilly. And it's an uplifted plateau that has marine sediments and limestone.
We have like Clovis sites here. Like there are sites around this area where people have found Clovis points.
Yeah, there was a famous one in Austin, a sand pit.
Yeah, so we know. There's bound to be something in the layers in some of those places. I just haven't heard anything coming out of Texas in terms of looking at the black mat and trying to analyze what was going on at the onset of the Younger Dryas, except in Hall's Cave.
Yeah.
And there are papers written by that. Watchers hopefully looking it up. I can't remember the guy's name. Do you remember him, Doctor?
Ted. Damn it. No, I don't remember.
Not Ted Bunch.
No.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Lundinus, maybe Ernie Lundelius.
He's now he's in Colorado or something like that. He's at the University of Boulder.
Yep.
Now. But anyway, we'll hopefully the watcher can find it or something. But yeah, interesting stuff. And then there was even I think there was a refutation of the impact hypothesis written from evidence in Hall's Cave by somebody, can't remember who, that was saying it was volcanism because they were looking at some oxygen isotopes.
That's right, yeah.
In the layers. So
Go ahead. Do you have active volcanoes there in Texas? Or would there have been active volcanoes?
Not during the
late Pleistocene.
Right, I don't think so. No, I mean, we have some very extinct ones down in Big Bend. I mean, as far as I know, those are very extinct. And then there's a really ancient one that's been leveled all the way to ground level in Austin.
Thomas Stafford.
Stafford, that's it.
Yeah. Lake Quaternary Geology, Archaeology, and Geoarchaeology of Hall's Cave, Texas.
Yeah, Michael Waters.
Michael Waters.
Yeah, Thomas Stafford, yeah. Stafford was the one we were talking to. He was going to try to get us in there, but it didn't work out.
It's on private property.
Yeah.
But okay, this brings up a good question though. How would you know? I mean, obviously you have charcoal, but in terms of the ash that's coming into these lake sediments and forming these crystals, how can you tell the difference whether it's volcanic versus just like plant material burning?
Yes, so for sure, because in eastern North America, we don't have any active volcanoes.
Okay, well, yeah, that's good.
So for Cahaba Pond, Anderson Pond, Michigan, and then Michigan, Flint, Michigan, there's no active volcanoes. So we would not expect to find volcanic evidence or tephra there. So if you were in Iceland or you were in Europe, they have the Locker Sea tephra that is used as a marker in some places. I mean, they know when that happened. And so tephra can be a good chronological marker if you have other things to cross date with it. So for my sites, there's no volcanism.
Is the ash? I'm sorry.
There's just no volcanism to consider, I don't think. I mean, it would have to travel a really long way.
Yeah.
And you'd have to have a volcanologist, I guess, look for those kind of things. And they can kind of fingerprint. If they find a certain thing, certain chemicals and shards and that, they can sometimes pinpoint that to a particular eruption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do. They do act like fingerprints. I remember going through this we were looking at all the dating methods. Tephra is a good marker.
So, but is the ash made of? Does it have the same chemical composition as the wood ash? Like you were saying,
No.
No,
wood ash is really high percentage of calcium carbonate.
That's what I was getting. So it would not form the same type of crystalline thing that you found in the thin slices.
Right.
No pun intended.
It's a silicious aggregate. That is the amorphous silica that is cementing together dust particles or organic particles, and they're quite small. The silicious aggregates are quite small, less than a millimeter, maybe less than half a millimeter.
So Google says the last time a volcano erupted in Texas was 30 million years ago. That's what it says.
There we go.
Blink of an eye.
Yeah, that wasn't that long ago.
That's what a geologist would say, that in a blink of an eye.
Yeah. But yeah, it says there are around 200, extinct volcanoes in Texas, but the last time one actually erupted was a long time ago.
So
it's break time.
Oh, it's break time.
Yeah.
All right, fine. I wanted to refute this paper by this guy who was saying it was volcanism.
Keep these questions in your head. Yeah.
Right. Like, where's he getting I've heard of that paper, but we would need to study it to where are you coming up with volcanism if it was 30 million years ago?
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
So that sounds like a weak point to me, but maybe we'd have to read it.
Yep. All right, we'll be right back. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, joined by Dr. Ballard. This has been a fascinating conversation. We got another segment left, and during the break, we were talking a little bit about something else that you might be wanting to look into. What did you call it? The green bone?
Green bone breaks on woolly mammoths.
Yeah.
So different mammoth carcasses, with most of the bones intact, have been found like in New York State, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in Michigan, Wisconsin. And so farmers may be digging and they encounter these. And in some cases, they find what appear to be green bone breaks. And so if you can imagine the Laurentide ice sheet is sitting there, everybody's happy, and all the herds of woolly mammoths are roaming the steppes, the meadows, the grasslands of North America, and then this bolide impacts the ice sheet, you're going to have meltwater, and you also might have like ice shatter. I'm imagining some ice chunks that perhaps this is how we got all those Kettle lakes in Minnesota and Michigan and so forth. And so if ice was flung out and it landed on the woolly mammoths and pinned them, they're going to show evidence of green stick fractures or bone breaks that would have happened while they were alive.
Yeah.
Rather than a bulldozer, digging and it breaks their bones. That would look different because they're slightly fossilized, and so that's going to break differently than if it happened while they were alive. And so this could be a good line of investigation to look into, to look at all of those, research all of those sites, if you could, and see how many of them had the green bone breaks. And so I have done some preliminary checking on this, and Dick Laub, Richard Laub, is a paleontologist, researcher that's now retired. And so he's seen some of these sites, particularly, I think it's a Hiscock mammoth or mastodon. And he said, yes, there is some evidence to support that. So that's encouraging. So now I would have to, as a scientist, I would have to do a systematic review and go visit the places where these bones are stored in museums and see it, and maybe take a paleopathologist with me, such as Bruce Rothschild. So he specializes in looking at injuries and illnesses detected by looking at the bones of mammoths, sloths, what have you. And this looks like cancer, that looks like a green bone break, and this looks like some kind of malnutrition, etc. So that's a project I would like to work on. And in that on that topic, there's a researcher in Europe, Leszczynski, and he studied a lot of the sites in Siberia and Poland where he's found mass deposits of mammoths. They don't have mastodons over there, but he's found mass deposits of animals that show some kind of illness, late Pleistocene. Some of them go back like 30,000 years old into Younger Dryas. And so his suggestion is that they had a mineral deficit. So that's a very interesting thing. They didn't have an ice sheet over there to test for a similar situation as, us with the Laurentide ice sheet. Well, they did have the Scandinavian ice sheet, but the Siberian ones, there wouldn't have been an ice sheet for a parallel situation.
And how would they get the mineral problem? Just like is it a food issue? It's like a
He said his view was that it was acidification of the landscape was leaching away the minerals. And so some of these mammoths were trying to go to like a salt lick or something to try and find the minerals that they were seriously lacking. So if you, as a giant mammoth, you would need a lot of calcium to keep up your skeleton and these huge tusks. And so you'd have to be eating a lot of calcium-rich fodder every day. And so maybe there was some calcium lacking in the vegetation. So anyway, that was his suggestion or conclusion that it was acidification that had caused the minerals to be lacking.
And is this, did this like happen suddenly? Does it appear to have happened suddenly? I mean, you wouldn't imagine there would be some massive population that developed in the middle of this deficiency.
Well, you know, I thought, oh, of course, this would be great if this was onset younger dryas. You have sudden acidification, and now they're all like puny. But he remarked that some of the bones date to 30,000 years ago. So it's like, okay, so that doesn't particularly support a problem that happens suddenly.
Yeah. But then again, George's tusk is like
20-something thousand years old, and it has cosmic
magnetic
materials embedded in it.
Yeah.
No, maybe there was more than one instance of things happening. You know, we tend to think, oh, these are so isolated. KT impact, that's a rare thing. That's 66 million years ago. I mean, that, if you Mark Boss law, oh no, that couldn't, statistically, we couldn't allow that to happen more than once in 66 million years.
Well, if this was, say the impact was caused by a disintegrating comet, it's possible that that comet had come through multiple times before and disintegrated a little bit. And so there would have been some material that could have caused impacts as the Earth passed through that debris field before the major one that caused this huge climate shift.
Yeah.
But it would just be, the next time the comet comes in and it disintegrates even more, or just that the Earth happened to pass through a fairly dense section of the debris.
Right. You see that there's that woodcut, I think, that shows all those shooting stars in it. Apparently that was a historical phenomenon that must not have wiped them out because someone made a woodcut of it.
Right.
Apparently there can be pretty heavy meteor showers.
Yeah.
So you might want to have Bill Napier on your show. He's the one that is more of the expert on the astronomical side of things. And I think he's talked about the torrids as a potential source for the comets or impact material. So, but if you have something, a catastrophe, you have an impact and all these fires, then any animals that survive, they're going to be totally stressed.
Yeah.
Right.
And they'll be malnourished and they'll be struggling. And there's a study in the Netherlands where they collect fossils from the bottom of the North Sea. And this is a good citizen science project because they'll try and suck the sand from. They're trying to keep the channels open for the boats.
They're dredging.
So they'll clear out that channel and they'll suck up the sand and spew it out onto the beaches. Well, as they're doing that, they pick up fossils. And so this has been made aware to the public by paleontologists over there. And so it's a hobby for them to go out and sift through walk the beaches as they're, after they've done this sand spraying and look for the fossils. And then they'll have a fossil day where they can bring them in and show them to the paleontologists who help identify them. And maybe they'll find a rare thing, saber-toothed cat jaw or something like that. And that helps science because, now we found this saber-toothed cat jaw and we didn't even know they had been in this area and that kind of thing. So one of the things that they had found from the bottom of the North Sea was, I think, a malformed woolly mammoth. It had extra ribs or something of that sort. And they attributed that to, maybe inbreeding. Because now you don't have as big a gene pool because most of the woolly mammoths are killed off. And so there's fewer of them, and perhaps that's why you get these strange extra ribs or missing ribs or that kind of thing.
Wow.
And so woolly mammoths survived until 4,000 years ago, and those that survive that long are typically found on islands like Wrangel Island in Siberia, and then the Channel Islands off of California, and the Pribilof Islands. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Like, why is it that those relict populations are on those islands? Unless maybe their habitat went away, and sea level was also rising. So,
Wait, the Channel Islands had mammoths like recently, more recently.
Right, they do, and they were pygmy. They were smaller. They were smaller, as if they're stunted, and maybe that's the inbreeding. Maybe it's a lack of nutrition and that kind of thing. But they've radiocarbon dated them, and I think those date, to more recently, like 4,000 years ago.
Man, that's cool. I didn't know that.
A mini fuzzy mammoth.
Mini fuzzy mammoths. Yeah, we need. Yeah. Well, that's a really cool idea with the green bone break thing. I like that.
Maybe you can get up to the bone bed.
That's what I thought too.
Because that guy has found thousands, tens of thousands of Pleistocene animal bones.
What's his name?
He has
Joe Rogan had him on his show.
He has like a warehouse full of these things, and they, you could go in and just walk around and look. Like, do they have fractures in that? A lot of them are broken up. But he's found everything. I mean, elk.
Oh, where's the bone bed?
It's in Alaska, but I think basically he's a gold miner.
Yeah,
and he uses this. When they're mining gold out of the Alaskan, out of the ground, the muck. They have this.
You use the hot water cannons.
Yes, there's this cannon and just spraying on the wall all day long.
Melt the permafrost,
melting it away and creating this river, and it's like this 60-foot thick layer of frozen muck. And then at the end of the day, they come out there, and then there's just tusks and skulls and stuff, and they're just dragging them out. And he's built warehouses and just stockpiled all these bone fragments.
That would be
thousands of them.
Fascinating place to go visit, because that has been described. Those muck beds have been described. I think the
John Reeves. I'm sorry, John Reeves is his name. John Reeves.
Yeah.
And I think George Howard might be able to contact him. I think George Howard is in contact with him.
Yeah. And yes, you're right. Those have been described for a long time. We read about them. What was the guy's name? There was a guy who traveled up there while they were mining and was looking at this. A geologist and a paleontologist was looking at all this stuff. And it's like they're mixed in with trees and all kinds of plants. And then there's antlers and tusks and bones of all kinds of stuff. And Reeves was recently on Rogan, and he was describing his whole story of this bone bed and how they've been dealing with it and how they've gotten scientists up there. And
it's on like a little 5-acre tract of land.
It has upset some people because he's found some bones that aren't supposed to be up there.
What?
Oh, I can't remember. One of the species that he's found up there is not supposed to have been that far north.
Maybe a mastodon.
It could be. I can't remember what it was.
I don't remember either. But it's a fascinating show.
Great interview with this guy.
So did they probably have radiocarbon dates on them and have some idea on if it's a range of dates or if it looks like it was an event and they're all the same age? I bet you it's a mix.
It probably is a mix. Yeah. He says he says the way it looks is like it was all washed in there and froze solid, like it flowed in.
And so that is a totally fascinating thing. Like, how on earth are you going to freeze that permafrost? And I've read about this with all these animals. Some of them were stinking carcasses and trees. And so now you're going to flash freeze that. How are you going to freeze them?
60 feet deep and flash freeze it and there's still meat on the bones in some cases. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Right. And there are carcasses in Siberia that have been unearthed.
Yeah.
Preserved. And so that's the permafrost again. And they say those are kind of rare, but how does that happen?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's something extraordinary.
Yeah, he also has described it stinks.
Yeah.
It smells really bad. Like they're still rotting, when you're washing them out of there.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, obviously, if it was in mud, I mean, it's going to become anaerobic. It's going to stink, but then it freezes. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's fascinating.
They found an entire bison up there, Blue Babe, and that was reported by Dale Guthrie, and it was this entire bison with all the flesh on it and everything, and the reason it was blue is because it was covered in an iron phosphate, Vivianite. It is this gorgeous turquoise color. So anyway, yes, how did that bison get frozen with all its fur and skin and muscles and everything?
Mm-hmm.
So have you all heard of the Ivory Islands?
Yes.
North of Siberia, and they estimate there were they've mined that for ivory, hundreds of thousands of mammoths were there. And then frozen, the bone. I don't know if they found carcasses that much, but they've got that many tusks out.
Right.
And what were they all doing there? Were they deposited there? The rivers would probably be flowing into the Arctic Ocean. And so maybe the bones somehow were eroded out and washed.
Yeah, and left the tusks.
Into that area, or, right.
Yeah, John Reeves talks about these tusks and how the way they're shaped and how heavy they are, that they won't want to move. They don't roll. And he's like, how do you get this thing to tumble down? It had to be, in other words, like it has to be a really powerful current to move these things.
Because if you get enough high energy water, it can move boulders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Water can move boulders. Glaciers can also move boulders, but water can, if there's a flash flood, it can take your car and take it down.
Yeah.
So it would have to be a lot of force to move that mammoth's tusk.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah. But you definitely get up there and see if you can do that, maybe start in on that.
The green bone break.
Yeah, because he's got so many bones, and not just of mammoths, but everything. All these Pleistocene animals, it's a whole bunch of them.
So I have talked with some scientists up there, and I said, do you think that that's a catastrophe site because of, all these trees and carcasses? And that's particular scientist said, no, he thinks it's a slow process.
Oh.
I thought, well, I don't know. Maybe what he's particularly looking at was a slow process, and he's confusing it with these other descriptions.
Yeah.
Because you do have solifluction up there, which is where if the permafrost, if it's on a slope, the top, say 5 feet, is going to thaw out in the summer. And then that kind of creeps down, and you get these lobes that form as that sediment, that mud kind of slops down a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And so they call that solifluction. And so if there was something dead up there, maybe, but I just don't see that amount. That, from what I've read, the amount of animals and trees in the mud, in the muck beds, it's like, that just doesn't sound like it would be a slow process. How are they all going to accumulate? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the green bone break thing, if it was just, if the percentage of the bone breaks that were green is really high, that would just, how do you explain that?
Yeah.
That's a very good angle, because I hadn't really thought about that for the muck bed area. But I was thinking for like the New York and, peripheral to the Laurentide ice sheet over here in the east, because there's a book by Hartnagel and Bishop. It's an old paper, 1921, where he's describing at that time all the instances of mammoth carcasses that had been found in these peat beds. And there were lots of them. And so that was a State of New York Museum publication. And I found that very interesting. It's like, gosh, they were finding lots of them in New York State in the peat, and So it just makes you wonder, like, okay, did he just get sick and he fell down in a bog, or, was there a catastrophe?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
We would like to know.
We would like to know. Yeah, and it would be a good angle on the bone beds up there because, obviously if it's a slow process of slumping, and I can't remember the term you used, but it's slowly moving and it's pushing the trees and the animals up against each other, you'll have a lot of breaks that are not associated with them, that obviously happened after they were dead. But if a bunch of the bones are broken and they were broken while they were alive, then you have something interesting there.
Okay, so going back to the Peshtigo fire, that just made me think. One of the things that Father Pernin talked about was when he went back up there in the ash beds, there was holes in the ground where the tree roots had been.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I don't think fire is going to typically go underground and burn that tree in that time.
Yeah.
But what could have happened is with wildfires, you can get fire tornadoes.
Mm-hmm.
You can get very high winds, and maybe the trees were wrenched out of the ground. And so that could have occurred. So then when you have a catastrophe like this with all kinds of crazy things going on, you could also maybe have tornadoes happening that's flinging things around.
Yes.
And that would explain the trees. Why are the trees in the mix with all the animals? Because it looked like they had been ripped up and twisted around. And
well, it also is kind of somewhat reminiscent of the Tunguska explosion. Like there's 600 square miles of trees, massive old growth forest trees that were just shattered. It was just like
splintered up,
and toppled. In this explosion that happened about 5 miles above the surface. So it's the shock wave that does it.
And there were also weird potholes.
Yeah.
Around the place.
Strange
Just
potholes.
Holes in the ground. Kind of like what you're saying. Like there was a tornado created right there.
Right. It just drilled in the whole. Yeah.
I don't know. It's.
But if you have a mass, a bolide explosion, low, like close to the surface, the shock wave hits the forest and picks up a bunch of animals, destroys a bunch of trees, and then water comes later and moves all that stuff. And deposits it in a corner or up against a hillside or a cliff and leaves it there. And then somehow it freezes fast enough
really fast.
so that it doesn't completely rot first. And then 12,000 years later, we're digging it out looking for gold.
Oh, this is the other thing. This is the other thing. In the Alaskan muck, they find what they call lenses, which are just pure pieces of ice within the muck. So maybe one of the ways is it froze is because it's just like a shaker, right? You put your ice in the shaker, maybe a little bit of whiskey, some other stuff. You shake it up, it gets really freaking cold, real fast. So if it was that scenario, it's got all these chunks of icebergs and everything in there, and it's just getting stirred up, and it's just cooling everything down really fast. Then it stops.
You're saying it's a catastrophe cocktail. That's what it is.
Oh, I like this. I like this with the ice in it.
Yeah.
Shaken, not stirred.
That's right.
So, yes. And then if you have soot in the atmosphere cooling everything down, and that's at the, North Pole. So here's another idea that I have discussed with one of the members that was attending the Cosmic Summit. Perhaps we had a rapid true polar wander at the time of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
Yeah. Yep.
Where maybe, does it make sense to have an ice sheet growing on the side of the planet and Siberia was ice-free?
No.
It would make more sense if the North geographic pole was maybe at the center of Hudson Bay or on Greenland. So you rotate that up. And now you have such an impact that it throws Earth off of its out of kilter, and it spins around some. And so this would be a hard thing for you to argue as a scientist, because it would be difficult to find the evidence for that. And it's rotated, not quite that much. That the way we reestablish if there's been polar wander, true polar wander, or apparent polar wander is you're going to look at the where magnetic North Pole is using paleomagnetic techniques.
Yeah.
But the problem is North geographic pole is not in the same place as the
magnetic pole.
Yeah.
the magnetic pole, right?
Yeah.
So the magnetic pole is going fairly rapidly towards Siberia and is not at the geographic pole. So now if you're trying to determine, okay, we're going to use the magnetic north to determine where geographic north is, well, they're not in the same place. So it makes it hard. And why is it not in the same place? Did something happen that, did they used to be close together?
Yeah. Yep.
So that's just another interesting rabbit hole to go down.
I agree very
Yes.
much. And there's some evidence that's pretty compelling, like that there are fossilized or, remnants of trees that do not grow above a certain line, and that we find them in the Arctic area where they should not be able to grow just purely because of the amount of sunlight that they get.
Yeah.
They do not grow there. So why?
Yeah. Right. Somebody posted on Facebook this black and white picture of a tree, and he said it was 4,000 years old, and the tree rings were fairly wide, meaning that it was warmer climate. Well, what's it doing on the north shore of Canada up there close to the Arctic Circle?
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure what was going on with that, but it's like, that doesn't really make sense. So I think there's folklore and folk legends, just like the flood myths that support. Han Klosterman, who was one of the co-authors on the Firestone paper, he was telling me that there was a lot of folklore regarding a pole shift.
Yeah.
So that's intriguing, but as a scientist, it's like you've got to be able to test things, and you can look to that for suggestions on maybe a direction to take your research in, but then you've still got to be able to test it and build a case for it, and
Yeah.
and then typically scientists are going to ask for the mechanism. What's the trigger? Just like with Alfred Wegener, yes, that made perfect sense that North America and South America fit very well with Europe and Africa, but they poo-pooed that. It's like, oh no, even though you've got fossils that match on both sides of the Atlantic, we're not going to believe that, because how on earth could it happen? And then later, Maurice Ewing and his group figured out seafloor spreading, and yes, there's your mechanism, but before that, they wouldn't accept Alfred Wegener as like very sensible. I mean, he had a very good idea, but because he couldn't explain how it happened, they wouldn't accept it.
Yeah. Yeah, we went through Hapgood's Path of the Pole book. He does the same thing. He kind of just goes through and he's like, okay, so here's evidence that may support this idea of of some kind of pole shifting. One of the ones that was really interesting was like conflicting bands of climatic evidence, like where basically in you have like certain kinds of sediments are deposited where the climates are a certain way, and those are set up in bands, defining like the equator and like northern and more southern latitudes. And if those are rolled over in ancient rock, then it seems like maybe that's pointing to a different axis, right?
Yeah, so the bands are slanted. They're not they're not where they should be.
In older rock.
Yeah.
And that there's multiple different levels of this that have been defined. And that's just one of the things. The whole book is fascinating. We went through the entire thing. There's a lot of stuff in there.
I'll have to look at that. Yeah.
Path of the Pole by Charles Hapgood. Really good book. It's outdated. He wrote it in the 60s. So he was working with 1960s, maybe early 70s geological evidence, but it's still really good. Got a lot of
the way he presents the various arguments is just, it's great.
Yeah.
Some of it's outdated, but it's just really good.
It is
really good questions he's asking.
Yeah.
So was he saying that, so geologists believe that initially the sediment is laid down horizontal, and then at some point it could be, once it's lithified, it could be tilted up. Or...
No, this is like take the entire Earth as it is right now, and you can define the equatorial band by its types of sediment, the way the rock is formed, because it's equatorial, and then above that, that you got the temperate and the Arctic and so on and so forth. And older rock, sometimes those bands are turned to the axis now. They don't align with it.
In other words, the rock's not tilted itself, but it looks like the
equatorial band is in a different place.
Yeah, the climate that would be at the equator is actually slanted to
30
the
degrees
current
to the
equator.
current equator, yeah.
Uh-huh.
As you go around the world looking for this, this temperate zone,
Yeah.
it goes up north and then down too far south. It's weird.
Yeah, and so people, when we were going through the book, people have pointed out that he was talking about this, I think it was just before, it was when the argument about tectonic drift was being had, right there.
Yeah, because that one, it hadn't been established yet.
Yeah. So people are saying, this has been explained by drifting continents at this point. Because he talked about, how have there been ice ages in southern India and, stuff like that, places where it's really hot. People are, he was quoting these scientists talking about being in Africa in the heat, looking at evidence of ice sheets, and how they're just like, how is this even possible? And the ice seemed to have been flowing in the wrong direction as well, flowing south towards the equator in these southern areas. So yeah, he just, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there about pole shifts.
Well, and it depends on if that's like hundreds of millions of years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
But if it's recently, so what you could look for is Paleo-desert evidence. So right now, deserts occur, I think, 30 degrees north and south of the equator. They also occur where you've got cold upwelling currents, such as off of the coast of Peru. And so if there was that kind of rotation, if we dug down, would we find like evidence of deserts? Latitudes, if it had shifted, so if we put Hudson Bay at the North Geographic Pole, now where would 30 degrees north and south be of the equator?
Yeah.
And could go to those places and look for evidence of past deserts.
More drilling.
Exactly, more drilling.
Let's do it. Dang it.
So,
that's a great idea.
Yeah, and that probably 6,000 years ago, the Sahara was green, and so that's another mystery right there.
Yes.
So when you're looking for paleo deserts, it's like, but wait, why was the Sahara green and now it's not?
Yeah, it seems to have formed relatively quickly for such an enormous feature. Yeah.
Well, if you deforest, that can help contribute to aridification of an area.
Yeah, it was grasslands for a long time, right? Wasn't that part of the idea, or is it supposed to have been forests?
I think there was some forests, and today they do have date palms, and there's hot springs and cold springs in the desert. And they will do some irrigation with the hot springs, and they have to find a way to cool that before they water the plants. So, which is odd. It's like, so there must be some kind of magma, or maybe it's coming from deeper within the earth to have those hot springs. But there are date palm plantations, that are man-made, that in Tunisia, for instance.
Yeah.
It's all fascinating.
Yeah.
Yes, and we want answers.
Yes.
Yes. I need answers, damn it.
How did the fish get there? How did they freeze them so fast?
Right. Right. That whole thing about the permafrost has been a really intriguing question for a long time for me, because geologists think that permafrost is going to form in areas that were not glaciated. And Alaska was not glaciated. You had the Cordilleran ice sheet as well as the Laurentide ice sheet, but Alaska pretty much was not glaciated. So, and it has like a lot of permafrost.
Yeah.
Siberia was not glaciated, and it has a lot of permafrost. So is this either tsunami action from the impact, or the meltwater, and now we have the shaken not stirred?
Yeah. I like this.
Cocktail.
Yes.
The Younger Dryas cocktail is what it is.
Younger Dryas catastrophe cocktail. We need to come up with this drink.
Right? And serve it at the next Cosmic Summit.
Yeah.
The drink designers.
Well, Dr. Ballard, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been great.
Tell our audience where they can find your thesis. You said it was online, right? Archive.org.
So you can, so for my master's thesis, you can just search on Joanne Ballard, Lateglacial, Michigan. It usually comes up. That's University of Cincinnati. And then I may have it linked on my ResearchGate site. So I'm on ResearchGate. So if you go to ResearchGate and look for Joanne P. Ballard or Joanne Ballard, Younger Dryas, you should be able to find me. And if you look under some of my publications, some of it is just like I made a PowerPoint of my findings on the Dutch sites. So there's some nice pictures of some of the things I was seeing underneath the microscope. And the sponge spicules, the significance of that is it must have been like a stagnant environment, because sponges like shallow water. They like, so it's going to have to be a moist environment for sponges to be living there. So it would have been subaqueous for the sponge spicules to be there. And it was at all 4 sites that I studied, there was sponge spicules. So it's like, seems like it was similar conditions over a large geographic range.
Yeah.
So ResearchGate, you probably are going to be able to find.
Okay. Can you email me with some links and I can just put them in the show notes for people?
Yes,
that would be great.
Can.
Okay, awesome.
Fine.
That'll be great.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and that was a great interview.
Yes. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And I think we might have her come back.
Yep.
And do something more on pole shifts in the future. That would be really cool. We had talked quite a bit about that after we finished the interview there.
Yep. Cheers.
Cheers, man. Oh, hold on.
Crack it open.
Yep.
And all of you, cheers.
We'll have to do that, and we have to have, what are they called? Cosmic cocktails.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Younger Dryas catastrophic cocktails.
Younger dry ice?
Younger dry ice catastrophic cocktails. Cosmic.
Shaken, not stirred.
Shaken, not stirred. That's a great idea, actually, the idea of the... you shake it up with the ice in there and everything gets extremely cold. Yeah. I mean, that can put all of the material that's in the water right at freezing.
Yes.
Which would begin the preservation process instantly.
And once it's refrigeration, right?
Yeah.
Once all the motion stops, then it can actually crystallize.
Right. Yeah.
Big thanks to the watcher
Yep.
for hooking it up the whole show, throwing things in the chats, helping us find the info we're looking for.
We didn't bring him on in the first segment because we had Dr. Ballard on, so we can bring him on now. Watcher, why don't you come on and say hi to everybody if you can?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, fantastic episode.
Yeah, that was great.
And you've got somebody who's obviously, looking at things through the same lens, but applying the scientific method to it out in the field.
Yeah.
Super, super cool.
Yeah. And this is one thing that I noticed about the scientists who came to the Cosmic Summit, is that they all seem to be that type of thinker. They don't just reject an idea outright because it's like, that's, doesn't match the standard model. It's like, well, we don't know the answer. We need to look. And
Yeah.
is there a way to support it or to refute it? You know, falsification, that kind of thing. It was very refreshing.
Yeah, it was. And they're like, maybe we mentioned this before, but was it Moore, Dr. Moore, who gave the toast?
Yes.
We had a dinner at the end where George took all the presenters out to dinner, and Moore stood up and did the old school like rings on his glass and then gives a toast, and he toasted everybody there and the people who George and his wife who put the whole thing on, but he also at the end toasted the entire audience, like everybody who came, saying like these people were here, they were engaged, they were very interested, like he was. And I heard him talking in the green room about just like how awesome it was to stand up in front of a non-academic audience that was so interested in what he was saying, and all the other people, he was like, this is great.
Yeah.
Like I've given presentations in front of colleagues and other scientists or whatever, and that's one thing, but to have just a normal audience out there who want to ask you a million questions and they're really interested in your subject matter when you're really diving into some strange details, microspherules and proxies for impacts or whatever. So
it was warm and fuzzies all around.
Yes, and they got some of them got some pretty wacko questions, and they handled it beautifully, right? It was just very patient, some of the questions they got, I was just like, oh my God, how is he going to handle this? And he was like, well, actually, if you look at this particular kind of data, you get this interesting thing. And he just turns it into whatever he wanted to talk about. It was really cool to see how the whole thing went.
Yeah, and the first was Mark the first presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, so Mark
Young
gets up there and does his presentation on the Younger Dryas and like what is all the data, what is and the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, right? And it's just like charts and graphs and all this stuff. And when he finishes, Joanne comes up there, joins him, and then there's this huge question and answer session, and they knocked it out of the park. That was basically the opener.
Yeah.
And
it was Micah Hanks and then Mark.
That's right.
Yeah.
Micah Hanks started out with the debrief.
Yeah.
In terms of the scientific discussion, that was the first one.
Yeah.
But yeah, that Q&A session was awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, we were like, wow, we need to get her on the show.
Yeah. And Mark is great. His presentation, I mean, like, the dude's deadpan, he's just delivering this data. He's doing it perfectly, but he, like, nails these jokes.
Yeah.
They come out of nowhere, because he's just, like, he's up there, he's very proper. He's like, a slide comes up with 15 graphs on it. And he's like, so it's very obvious when you look at this data that all, and I'm like, I don't know, bro. But then he's dropping these jokes in, had the whole place laughing. It was great.
Yeah.
And then, the question and answer sessions, which we were told, and, I agree, we didn't have enough of that. There wasn't enough time. And then George complains like, well, where am I going to get the time?
Yeah. Yeah, well, he worked really hard on the schedule, and it was tough for him. I could tell.
No,
he's like, is this too short of a time for people? And like, he wants to get everybody in there, but then he's like, I have to limit it to this 2 days.
2 days. Yeah. I'm not saying that he was like his reaction to like, is right. He's like, I have all these people, I have a certain number of hours in the day. I don't want to exhaust anyone. So like you need to give the presenters enough time to give their presentation. Then there needs to be enough time for everybody to kind of get up and go to the bathroom for the next one. So where do you fit in another 20 minutes of question and answer in between each presenter? You don't, like without making it 4 days long.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all valid. And it's just, it's all stuff for the future to think about in the future and a learning experience. But it was really good. And yes, that session with Joanne and Mark was great. And the one that Dr. Moore did after his presentation was excellent, I thought.
Yeah, also.
Yeah. And Randall did a couple of long Q&As too.
Yeah.
And there were 2 microphones on either side of the big auditorium hall, and there were lines at both of them for every Q&A session. And then the big panel that they had up there at the end where everyone was up there except for me and Chris Cottrell. There were lines at them too to ask those questions, and then they were also fielding questions from the live stream. So it was cool.
Yeah, I think for the time and all things considered, it was really great.
It was really good.
And one thing about
She says we should get Bill Napier on. I'm like, yeah,
we should.
Yes, I would love to have him on the show.
Yep.
And Dr. Moore, and Ken.
Yep.
You think we can get Ken on the show?
I think so. I don't know. He might be mad at me because we didn't rock out.
Yes, we didn't. Kyle and Ben.
He might reject me
On principle.
Yes. We did not rock out.
Right.
No.
I'm not coming on your show. There was no rock and roll at the summit. Yeah.
I would have to accept that. It's unacceptable that we did not rock out.
Kyle and Ben and I all brought our instruments, lugged them through the airports and everything, and we never took them out of the cases and played.
Know.
Yeah. There just wasn't time. Never the right time.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, the one thing I'll just say this real quick. The last thing I want to say about Joanne, just listening to her talk about, how she got started and then the various different interests that she had. And like, I have a lot of respect for the fact that like she sees some interesting aspect in this field. She's like, I'm gonna go to school, get the degree, boom, start studying.
Yeah.
Like that. That's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
And now as she learns more and she sees like, okay, here's this wholly other thing that we could look into. It's like,
Yeah.
I like that as opposed to like you go get an education into one field and you just stick with that the whole time.
Yeah.
Right. And whether it applies to this or that doesn't matter. It's just, so
yeah.
this
And
is
then
like,
she also tries to like, what does she say? Like you get an advisor that's a specialist in this, or you find out that somebody who's really good at this thing that you want to be able to do, you go and just like spend 2 weeks with them learning their processes.
That's so cool. That's what I'm talking about. It's kind of, I love learning about that process that I don't know. And the way she approaches it is just, that's great to me.
Yeah. She wanted to do core drilling, so she went and spent some like 2 weeks or a month at this lab so she could learn how to core drill.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
And they're like, we'll take you out and core drill this lake that's nearby and show you how it's done and freeze it.
Yeah. It's almost like, I mean, yeah, it's just, it's not normal. Maybe it is normal, but you don't hear about that too much, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have a specialty and that's what you do.
Yeah.
Well, being interested in like this particular mystery,
Yeah.
well, there's all these various aspects to the mystery. So like,
Yeah.
I'll get a degree in that. I'll go study under this person. I'll
Mhm.
work with these people, and then as you learn, you realize, oh, well, here's an unanswered question.
Yeah.
We'll have to do this, and we'll have to go to this place, and I'll have to get this person to come with me.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I love that.
Yeah.
I want to go, and we need to drill. That's
We can do the drilling. We've never missed a target depth, right? We can be Bruce Willis in this scenario. We'll drill for you.
All right. So, what's next?
Well, we got we have Space Weather News. We got Ag Update. We'll do Space Weather News from spaceweather.com, which is AI free, by the way. CME impact sparks geomagnetic storm. A minor G1 class geomagnetic storm is underway following the impact of a CME on July 25th. It is unclear if this is the early arrival of a CME originally expected on 27th or a completely different CME which was previously overlooked. That's interesting. You can have a totally overlooked CME. There's also another story in here about a comet, but it's really long. I'm not going to read it. It says it was shaped like the Millennium Falcon. So
Hey.
it's the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy. Current conditions, solar wind speed is 485.8 kilometers per second. The density is 2.46 protons per cubic centimeter. Current sunspot number is 137. The neutron count today is minus 1.7%. And the KP index right now is 3.67, which is just at the top of the quiet range. 24-hour max was 4.67, which is unsettled. That is your Space Weather News for the week.
All right.
Ag stuff. You
So,
guys had an explosion.
Yes, I had an explosion. I thought I talked about that already. Did I not?
Did you?
No, maybe not.
Maybe you did on the live show.
Yeah, we're very close to. We're in the middle of harvest. We've harvested two. Well, in a way, we just harvested the Merlot, which is a small,
Small
tiny
batch.
little piece. But basically, every couple of days, I have to go systematically through the vineyard, through the various different blocks of grapes, and take berry samples. And when you're doing that, you don't want to bias the sample by looking at the grapes and maybe you don't pick the green ones, or you don't, maybe you don't pick a raisin or something.
Yeah.
So you try to, I just do this thing where I take 5 paces. You don't want to pick off of the end of the row that's got more sunlight than the vast majority of the grapes that are being shaded by the row next to it, or the vines next to it, or the canopy over that
like
side.
kind of a blind sample from.
Yeah, so you take 5 paces in, you go to the right side, you reach in, you find a cluster, you pull one off the very bottom of the cluster, you pull one off the side, you pull one off the top or the shoulder of the cluster, throw it in a bag, go to the other side, do the same thing, take 5 more paces and do that. And in a block, 1 acre block, you might have 8 to 11 rows or something, just depending on the length of the rows. And so I'll try to do at least 2.
Two
So
rows.
I'll walk down to the end and I'll go over 4 or 5 rows and come back.
Yeah.
If I have people helping me, maybe I'll do 3. It takes time. So put those samples in a bag, go back to the lab, blend them up or crush them, get the juice out, put it in a centrifuge, get the solids out of it, and then measure the sugar, and then measure the
pH and
the pH and the
total
titratable acidity.
Yeah.
And the pH, obviously, pH and acidity the pH will go up as the acidity drops, and the sugars are climbing. So we're watching the sugar, hoping to get 24, 25 Brix, between 23 and 25, depending on the variety. And so you do that every couple of days, and you can start to see a trend. Like, are they stuck? Because they can get in a situation where they get stuck and the sugars stop climbing. Like, they're just not producing. We have really hot weather. We don't have any rain.
Yeah.
Or you might get a big rain, and then it dilutes the sugars in the grape. And so the sugars stop climbing. Well, we haven't had that problem this year, but as you watch these trends, we're trying to sort of estimate, is it a week out? Is it 2 weeks out? So it's looking like we might be picking in a week, maybe 2 weeks. I don't know if we can make it 2 weeks. Some of the grapes are starting to shrivel. And it's just so hot. And it's going to be hot for days. So, and then the vines can basically just give up. They're just like, ugh, they just can't handle it. And so then the fruit really will start to shrivel up, and then you just got to pick. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. So we'll take the fruit in. Like today, we had last night they picked the Merlot. We crushed and destemmed it, and got it into the winery. And of course, the fruit was in the winery overnight, so it was cool.
Yeah,
it had cooled down. So we measured all that same stuff out of the must, and then which is all the grapes and the juice and everything together. It's called the must. It was really nice.
Yeah.
25.5 bricks, which is percent sugar, 25.5% sugar, and
3.75 pH.
Yeah, so we added a little bit of grape acid, tartaric acid, brought the pH down, brought the titratable acidity up. 7 grams per liter is what they say is optimal. And then we hydrated yeast, threw it in there. We'll come back tomorrow and see if it's taken off.
Yeah.
And then for the next 5 or 6 days, probably, it's a small batch, so it might take 7 days or 8 days.
Yeah.
To ferment to dryness, where it consumes all of the sugar, and we should be at an alcohol percentage of like maybe 14.
Yeah, and
something.
it'll make about a barrel and a little bit of change.
Yeah, so 70 gallons.
Yeah.
Probably. So that's where we're at, and I've been ordering yeast and nutrient and trying to round up where I can find enough harvest bins to handle. I think we're going to have between 20 and 30 tons this year of grapes.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So we're getting close to our target, which is going to be like 40 to 50 tons a year. So, yeah, that's where we're at. That's right.
God dang, it's hot.
It is. What else? I'm sorry. I have to admit, I haven't really been good on the news stories. I'm just.
That's okay.
You
I think
know.
we're basically done. What about we got producers?
Oh, that. See, I'm not even doing my job over here.
And I know a couple of you have emailed me asking for the 1UP box address. I will get back to you on that eventually. Just give me some time. I'll get to it maybe this weekend or we'll see. But yeah. So just be patient with the emails if I'm supposed to respond. I don't always remember. So I may need to change my system. But I know there's 2 in there. 2 people have asked me for the PO box, so I'll get that to you guys.
Nope, I don't think we have any.
Okay,
Yeah, I think we're.
good deal.
I hope that's correct. If we forgot you, I'm sorry, but it doesn't look like it.
All right, no problem.
We
All
did
right.
get some on the live show last time.
Yeah, we did.
Are we done? We don't have any emails, I guess, huh?
No, I think we're done. Yeah, we're good.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
All right, folks.
Yep.
Until next week.
Yep. Thank you,
What are we doing
guys.
Next week.
No idea.
That's the way she goes.
Yeah. Yep. No clue what happens next week. Maybe Marty. I was asking him if he could do it, so we'll see.
He better.
Yeah. All right, guys. We love you.
Always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamo.
Get back to work.